How are you doing today?
I'm good. I've been, I just recovered from COVID like last week. It's my first time getting it. It wasn't that bad, but still, I guess I kind of used it to rest. Like, it's kind of tragic that it takes falling sick sometimes to really switch off. But, I'm still kind of, I don't know, I'm alright. I'm just chugging along.
Yeah. When did you start feeling better?
I would say I'm still like 90%. But I mean, okay, the first 3 days were pretty bad. I wouldn't say it's the worst I've ever been sick. Like maybe top 30% of sick. Like, so, okay, the first 2 days, I definitely had to like lie on the couch and sweat and fever and like out of it entirely. By the third day, I was functional. Like I could walk around, and stuff, but I didn't feel like doing anything. So I just vegetate and watch TV. And about maybe 6 or 7 days in, then I felt like, okay, but I was still testing positive. I tested positive like until 10 days in, which is strange. And so my wife didn't get it. So we were like separating from each. So we both work from home. And so it's like, it's funny kind of not being in contact with her, even though we're in the same place. Like, so that was strange, but yeah, it's over now, basically. Have you gotten it yet?
Yeah, I got it for December 2021.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely a low point for me. I didn't realize I had it at the time, and then
Oof.
yeah, like it definitely affected my thoughts and just a bad point. But what did you learn about yourself when you were doing it? When you were in that place? Because time away from your wife.
Yeah, I mean, so the funny thing is, I quit smoking in like March this year, and the brain fog that I had from that was actually worse than, like, apart from like the first 2-3 days of COVID where I'm having feverish and all that. Like the week of recovery after that, it wasn't as severe as quitting smoking was for me. So it's kind of funny. Like it wasn't that bad. It was just, what did I learn? It's just, I think the main thing that I've been sort of reflecting on is that it's kind of sad that it takes me falling sick to really give myself a break, like psychologically. Like it should, like I found myself thinking, it shouldn't have to be that I'm sick, that I can really switch off, like sleep whenever I want. So I don't have a job, right? So I'm like in control of my own schedule, but like, even today or like yesterday, right? Like I find myself, I go to bed, and if I don't feel like I have done, not necessarily work, but if I don't feel like I made like a decent shot of the day, like I didn't read or write or do something, I can't really sleep well. And then I'll tell myself in bed, okay, I've got to rest, today's done, tomorrow, whatever, like I'll do whatever. But I'll wake up like 5 hours later, just not enough sleep. And I'll wake up and be like, I gotta do something. Like, I intellectually, I don't think that's true. Like I'm like philosophically and intellectually committed to, when you're tired, you should rest. Like you're not doing anyone any favors if you're like forcing yourself to work when you don't want to. But like emotionally and physically, I'm still not. There's some levels of that I haven't worked through yet. So that's kind of the main thing I think about when I'm sick, I think.
Whose voice do you think that is?
It's a good question. I want to say it's my own, but I think it's a reaction to. So when I was a teenager, right, I was very. I was always indifferent to school. So some people, you hear from some people that it's like they've internalized the reward system of school and family. Like, if you do your homework, you're a good kid, you score well on tests, blah, blah, blah. I don't think I ever bought into that much. So I was very like the class clown kind of archetype. Like I was very, fuck this, cut class, do nonsense, whatever. So I don't think I ever bought into that. But I married pretty young. I was 22 and I got married with my wife. And she at that time, like she she was estranged from her parents who disapproved of us dating. And so we got married young. I needed to pay for the house, and like I just felt this need to grow up really fast at 22-ish. And so I think I kind of felt obliged to like overcompensate for what I felt like, my teenage years. I was goofing off. That was the narrative, I guess. So even though I say that I don't buy into like school and workaholism and I don't know, it's complicated. You're asking me about this and I'm still in the middle of figuring it out. So I'm not entirely sure what I think. But it seems like I had a sort of I had a phase that's like I need to work hard to prove to myself or to others, I don't know, that the things that I'm doing are worthwhile and correct. Partially that. Another part of it is, I guess, so I walked away from like a pretty successful like startup marketing career ladder. Like if I like so at from 23 to like 27, 28, I was working in startups I was working in one startup basically doing content marketing. I was really good at it. And conceivably, there's an alternate universe where I continue to do that and I would be making a lot of money. I would be, professionally successful in that sphere. I don't think I would be happy. I don't think that's what I want. Like, and I spent a couple of years longer in that job than I, in retrospect, feel like I should have, partially because I felt a sense of obligation to my boss for taking a chance on me, because I was like this,
He found your blog.
Yeah. So I feel like he saw my value where not many people did, and so I felt gratitude for that. And he was a great boss, it's a great work environment. So it's like all of those good things made it hard for me to accept the truth that I wasn't having fun anymore after like 3 to 4 years. So the first 3-4 years when it was like more of a early stage startup environment, it's very fun. Every month there's like new challenges. And like 3 to 4 years in, it's like, okay, we've established like this stable, successful thing. And now it feels like it's more of the same, like growing from, so we used to, when I joined, we had made like a couple of $1 million in revenue for our clients. And then we crossed like 100 million over a few years later. And then when we got to like 200 million, I'm like, like that doesn't feel like growth, it feels like more of the same. And like, I was trying to think to myself, like, what would feel satisfying? And I almost felt like I didn't have the right to think in those terms, as like a married man with, I don't know, it's a part of me just felt like it was selfish and indulgent of me to be thinking like, I have all these friends who were in jobs that they hated with bosses that they hated, right? So I'm like, they are complaining about, my boss treats me like shit. And I'm like, my boss is great, but I kind of feel like I want to do my own thing, sort of. But eventually it just got to the point where and then we had like we're hiring more people and it's like management in between and it just didn't feel the same anymore. But like, so eventually when I left, I didn't know how long it would take me to kind of reach a new stable equilibrium of some kind. So when I left my job, I'm like, okay, I'm going to spend a year just doing creative writing of any kind in any place that I like.
When was that?
That was June 2018. So in like July 2018, I'm like, okay, I have some money in the bank, not a ton, but like some, like about a year's worth of runway-ish. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to blog a lot, tweet a lot, try and write for magazines, like just any kind of creative writing that I can do. And in like the 6 months around after that, like my Twitter started blowing up. And so that felt like a sign. I was willing to be like, okay, I'm going to try this for a year. It's probably not going to succeed at a scale that I want. And then I'll have to take another job and then I'll repeat that cycle every 2 or 3 years or something like that. But, it worked out. And so, I still take like marketing consulting clients here and there and stuff. So I'm in a funny place where I do have like freedom, like intellectual freedom, psychological freedom, and I can go on podcasts at 1 a.m., whatever, it's fine. I can do whatever I like. But I have not yet crossed the threshold where I feel confident in my finances, for example. So like, if it's just me and my wife, it's not that big a deal. But like, if we have kids, for example, then it's like, how am I gonna? I don't think I'll be the kind to like spend a lot of money, but I would want more.
Visa. So sorry to cut you off, but
yeah, sure.
I was listening to a podcast from you in September of 2020.
Yeah,
you said the same exact thing.
Oh,
which is interesting. Yeah,
what
you said you were just basically exactly what you said about the place and money, and you were like, well, in a few years I won't be at that place, but for now I am. So it's just funny how
it's so interesting
how like I could literally insert the clip of you saying that right here, and it's just like, why do you think you're in the same position you were in September of 2020 and saying the same thing today?
That's interesting. I don't think it is exactly the same position, but the feelings are the same for now. So since between then and now, I wrote and published Introspect, which was my big, Introspect is a really good book. I can say full-heartedly, like I really spent my time and effort to write that book. But it's not a book that makes a lot of money in a short amount of time. I mean, I could use my marketing chops and like construct a whole kind of campaign around it or whatever, but I don't really want to. I still might, so I think I'm still recovering from some post-book publishing burnout, which is like entirely self-imposed, right? That's the funny thing. There's no boss or whatever. It's like just me, my expectations, and my desires. Why is it still the same? I don't know. That's my cross to bear, I guess. It's like part of it is, if I were to psychoanalyze myself, I think part of it is that it's almost like maybe I feel some guilt about being a solo, like I mean, to really, really simplify it and get it to like the heart of it, it's like I still hesitate to ask for money, right? So like I have an audience, but I have a Patreon that I don't talk about very much. I have books to sell that I don't like. It's not like I have like a weekly, like, so even today or yesterday, I tweeted about one of my books and I sold a bunch. Let me see how much I sold. I sold like, fuck. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, I sold like 7 books when I tweeted about the book, right? So like every time I tweet about my books, I sell a bunch of copies. But I don't want to be the guy that's like shilling his book every day. And so there's like this tension that I'm still grappling with, which is like, of all the places that I could be in, I do think that I'm happy to be on this side of the struggle. Like I would much rather be here than like, and this could be rationalizing, right? But like on the other end, maybe it's a straw man or like a oversimplified boogeyman, right? But like this idea of like this very salesy, smarmy, grifty guy. And it's funny thing is I help my clients with this, and maybe me helping my clients with this is like me doing exposure therapy for myself to learn to do it for myself. Which is that when I hear anybody else say, oh, I have this stuff that's good, but I don't really feel comfortable selling it, I'm like, why? Talk to me about it. Let's diagnose this. Let's get to the bottom of this. Like let's articulate precisely what are your values and what do you feel is being violated by specifically what actions, and then let's steer clear of what you think is bad, but let's explore the space in between. And if I could hire myself as a consultant, that would be great. I've tried it. I'm like, let's go to a cafe and sit down with a notebook and like back and forth. I think I'm overdue for that. I haven't done that in a while. But
one thing Nat Eliason suggested is his daughter giving him his daughter were to come to him with the problem that he's asking himself.
That's great.
What would he tell his daughter? And that's a great mental framing for anybody with any problem.
That's very true. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm probably overdue for another session like that. But the short answer to the question you're asking, I think, is like, I don't think it's the world that's limiting me. I think it's my internal psychology. And it's funny because I wrote a whole, like, between September 2020 and now, I wrote a whole book that's basically about how do you deal with internal conflict and internal stuckness. And I'm very good at helping other people with it. And yeah, maybe I should even just tell a friend to help me with it so that I can. And that's one of the cool things that can be done that people don't realize can be done, which is that, so sometimes you seek a professional for help with something that is because you don't really know what you need. But sometimes you know what you need, and then you can actually tell someone who isn't a professional what you need, and then because you've told them what you need, they can like follow that script. I've seen this play out. It's very interesting. And I probably need to do that.
Well, it's like fitness coaches online still have fitness coaches, and that's not a bad thing. Like they know what they need to do, but just having that accountability or just having that other perspective is helpful.
Right. Yeah. So I always thought that I wouldn't be interested in getting a fitness coach, for example. But one of the funny things is, so I'm Singaporean, and in Singapore we have national service, so like military obligations, and part of that is every year or so we have to go for training. And so usually the trainers are like mediocre, just other guys who don't really care, and we're all just kind of. But last year I happened to have a session as a group, like so all the guys, and there was a guy who's a professional, his day job is being a fitness trainer, and he was like, "You guys are in for a treat because normally I charge big money for this, and not we're doing this informally." And he was so good at what he did, and I felt the difference. He's like. And the thing I would describe it is, it's that when you trust that the person coaching you is really good at their job and they're really attuned to your psychology and your experience in the moment, you can actually emotionally, intellectually, psychologically, like relinquish control, or not control is too strong a word, but you relinquish. You can just focus entirely on doing what he's telling you to do, and then he will say,
because you trust it.
Yeah. And there is a piece in switching off that I realize I don't experience very often. But when I remember that experience, I was like, oh shit, I could feel how under his guidance, I would definitely, and that workout was amazing. And I could feel how, if I had this kind of guidance on a consistent basis, like it makes perfect sense to pay for it because the person is so sensitive. So the thing that I would advise people to look out for in any kind of coach, right, whether it's a guitar teacher or whatever, is how sensitive is that person to where you are in the moment, right? So it's like if you're struggling, can they see whether you can continue struggling or should you not? And they reassure you with like that, right? And yeah, I'm not doing a great job of conveying that, but like it was a light bulb moment for me to realize that, that's what a good coach does. And I tried to bring some of that to what I do with my clients as well. It's like, which is like talking about marketing, right? But like it's, people usually struggle not with, and again, as I'm saying this in the conversation that we've been having so far, I'm like, yeah, this is a thing for me as well, right? It's just people usually struggle not because they lack tactical insight. Like everyone knows what they should be doing, right? Everyone's like, I should be making more videos. I should be posting more. I should be. Yeah, that's fine. You don't need to feel guilty about it. Like you're saying it, cool, But like, so what's stopping you? And respect whatever it is that's stopping you, because if it's stopping you, it means it's a part of you that doesn't want to. And rather than be like, I'm a lousy person or a lousy marketer or lousy whatever because I'm not doing it, it'd be like, no, let's be curious instead and try to figure out what. Like really understand the blockage so that you can unblock. So like unblocking it requires understanding it, and you can't unblock by just either bullying yourself or kind of feeling despondent about it or whatever. Like only like real understanding can go through.
I love that, man. Well, one of the reasons why I was so excited to talk to you today was because when a lot of times when I do these podcasts, people come in with agendas or things to talk about. Nice. And that's really cool. That's fine. But what I love about you and from listening to you on previous podcasts, you're just trying to explore ideas. Yeah. And you're just trying to understand yourself better so you can help other people learn about themselves better. Yes. And that's rare. as a host to come in with that, and that's why I felt so free of like,
that's fun.
We could literally talk about anything.
Yeah,
and
that's the idea.
But you've had 212,000 tweets.
Yeah,
that's wild. Why so many?
I never set out to tweet so much. It's just that I would say my brain or my mind is intrinsically prolific. And the great thing about Twitter is that it allows for a very high rate of the feedback loop between a thought and someone else's thought can be really, really high. So it's like you can, there's nowhere else on earth still that you can have a thought, share it with thousands of people, get responses of all kinds, whether you imagine it or not, and then respond back in real time. Like sometimes it still feels like magic. I have friends all over the planet, right? And I could be like getting up to pee at 3 a.m. and I have some thought and I tweet it before I go, and then I come back and I've got like 12 replies from friends. And it's like this accelerated call and response thing. But the funny thing is, I do feel like I am at a stage in my writing where I feel that, again, at 200,000 tweets, for me, I have begun to feel the limitation of what you can do with tweets. And, I will continue tweeting. I'll enjoy that back and forth. But there is a certain depth of thought or depth of description that you can't get into in 280 characters. And even if you did like, okay, I'm going to do a 20 tweet thread going into as much detail as possible, the nature of the medium is such that the way it's punctuated prevents, so again, the counter example is if you wrote a paragraph that's like 10 tweets long, but it's all one paragraph, there's subtlety that you can do in the middle of the paragraph, and you can kind of downplay certain things and put things behind and forward that you can't really do in tweets. Every tweet is like a punch in the face, and which is part of what makes it valuable. It's both its strength and its weakness. The strength is that you can really sharpen your talking points. And so I would advise every, I don't know if every author, but like tweeting does shape your thinking somewhat. It shapes and it'll get you to sharpen your talking points, like the ideas that you want to present in punchy forms. But it can impoverish you a little bit if you're not careful in terms of like depth. That too is like not just depth, but like I always think about in any medium that you're working in, like what is it that you can do with this particular medium that you can't really do in any other medium. And so I was reading Moby Dick a while ago, and you really feel it takes like pages and pages sometimes to really get into the nuance of a person's psychological state. And the same, I guess, for like podcasts. If you're going to talk for hours, you can really kind of explore like, oh yeah, earlier I said this, and that references that, and turns out this, blah blah blah. Like you need that space, and if you don't have that space, you can't do that kind of thinking. And if you spend a lot of time not doing that, you start to, or at least I do. I find that if I'm only tweeting and I haven't written long form stuff, or I haven't had long conversations with friends, I start to feel kind of tense. I feel like it's very
something's missing.
Yeah. It's like it's a lot of punch but no flavor. I don't know if that's the right term. It's a lot of there's no depth, right? There's no, like, people do need space. Like this big it's like otherwise you're looking at things through a very small keyhole, and you miss that sense of like, oh, you're like being in nature or being somewhere where you feel like expanses of time. But I mean, so regarding why so much, even before Twitter, I used to blog a lot, and I just always have been hungry to participate, I would say, in like just the world of ideas, right? So even as a kid, when I would go to libraries, I'd be like, oh my God, books everywhere, and every book is a universe of information that somebody put together for you. And so there was a period of time where I was blogging every day, and that was fun. But like, and I kind of want to get back into that now, but I'm always thinking. So I just like ideas. I like playing with words. It's a thing that I want to get very good at, and I feel like it's a thing that, I think I've wanted to say somewhere that like tweeting this would feel a bit more kind of So I'll just say it first. So I feel like I don't see or hear from people who describe aspiring to like legendary status of like greatest of all time kind of thing. And the thing is, if you tweet that, there's something about the context of the tweet that makes it seem like a provocation. But I don't mean it as a provocation. I mean, maybe not everyone would say
the
that.
Statement again.
Just I believe I want to see people who aspire to like legendary status, greatest of all time. You know, like really like you take. I'm looking at my bookshelf, like Emerson and Goethe, and you know all these like once in a century Shakespeare, right?
I'm trying to imagine that on the Twitter timeline right now.
Yeah, like so if somebody says, oh, I want to be like Shakespeare, and you know, like I guess Kanye West is kind of known for saying that kind of thing, and it sounds deranged, and people associate that utterance with, oh, he's crazy. But like, you know, to become that great, you have to want to become that great, because it doesn't happen by accident, right? So for like Emerson, Goethe, and Montaigne, all of those guys, and they spend decades on their craft, right? They work really, really hard to get really, really good. And the thing is, it seems like in this mainstream social life, and maybe this is always true, I don't know, like being great and being like humble and socially skilled about how you talk about greatness, like they're kind of separate things, and to expect both from the same person is very tricky and challenging, because it's almost like time spent cultivating social niceties and like polite society skills is time not spent getting fucking great at the thing that you want to be great at, right? So
yeah. Well, on that point, it's funny that you said in a previous podcast this statement, and I want to highlight a specific point of this statement is, if I want to be a good writer, I have to write a lot. So how do I create a project that forces me to write a lot? But notice what you said in that statement. You didn't say, if I want to be the greatest writer of all time, I need to write a lot. You said you were putting not yourself down, but you were lowering the standard in that moment so that it could be taken in a nicer way, so to speak. So it would be. Does that make sense to you?
I think there's a truth to that. So I mean, I would like, I can argue with myself about this. I could say something like, if you fixate on wanting to be the greatest of all time, right, then everything you do now has this perceived importance to it, and like this, like, oh no, everything I like, you know, what would the goat do, right? Like, am I having the goat breakfast? And like, if you kind of if you overdo that, it can get in the way. So there's this paradox. So you've seen my A. Lamau meme, right? Like, there's this paradox of, to be great, I believe you have to aspire to greatness, but you also have to like not let it consume you. It's a very thin tightrope to walk. Yeah, so it's almost, I often provide the counter melody. So if I did have a friend, like, so I do have some friends who are ambitious, and I haven't, so I would say most of my close friends, they understand the attention, they kind of do both. But once in a while I encounter like a very, very aggressively ambitious young guy, usually guys, aggressive guy in my DMs, and it's like teenager, right? Like, or like early 21, and they're very like, I want to be amazing, and I find myself being the voice of, like, I kind of smile and be like, oh, that's great, you know, but like, how will you sustain this? How will you continue this next year and 5 years from now and 10 years from now? Because I've seen people who like get really heated and excited, and they burn out over like a 3-year trajectory, and then they're like, oh, I didn't become, you know, Mr. Beast or PewDiePie or whatever in 3 years, and therefore I'm a failure, and therefore I'm never gonna do this thing again. And I'm like, that's not how they succeeded either. They had to do the thing for like 10 years or something before. Like, you know, when you reverse engineer greatness, it's always a long, steady process with a lot of work over a long period of time. So. And that is not, you know, it's not glamorous, it's not sexy, it's really just showing up day after day, and so you have to enjoy the work as well, right? Yeah, so I have all of these kind of dramatic swings and tensions, and Twitter is a difficult place to kind of present both at the same time. And in a tweet, there's too small a space, and you can try and do it over long threads, but even then, people don't want to necessarily pay attention to it. It can be fun, it can be exhausting. Everything's in cycles, I guess.
Why is being online a psychological sport?
Right. Well, because probably the short answer is that it invites context collapse. right? So like anywhere else, when you're in a room and you're talking to a bunch of people, you can look at the room that you're in and you'll be like, oh, like so a stand-up comedian, for example, you tell a bunch of jokes. Oh, that joke didn't really land. People didn't seem to get it. I'll move my material to be a bit more in this direction. And then you get to know the room and then that works out. So that's like, it's a bit of a psychological challenge to model the room, but then, you get it and you're done. But online, it's an infinite kind of like the room that you're in. You say something and suddenly there's like a million more people in the room, or like just you get dragged out of this room and you're in 35 different rooms at the same time, and everyone's saying a different thing in a different room, and like humans are not wired for that, And people will you can go and read things people are saying at the early stages of like the Industrial Revolution and stuff, and it's cute. It's cute how people were saying that like newspapers are driving us mad because we're not designed to read so much information. Like one newspaper that's like finite, and they're like, there's too much news in one, and like amateurs, that's what they were dealing with.
The radio is going to take our children, and that's going to be the end of our children.
You can change the channel on the radio. There's too much. There's like, and probably our kids and grandkids will be like, what? They're complaining about
TikTok?
Scrolling.
That's not a big deal.
Yeah, that's baby stuff. We deal with so much more intense. But yeah, so it's like our brains are now like like I was saying, when I tweet at whatever time, I get to get responses from 12 different people in minutes, and I've done a very good job of curating good people, and it's a challenge. Earlier today I was tweeting asking people, do you know how to surf and do you know how to juggle? And I was like, like most people don't, right? And I would say that being good at managing an online space, it's at least as difficult as juggling or surfing, in that you have to like kind of, manage expectations, respond to surprises and like people that you don't expect showing up and saying shit at you. And, everybody has some trauma or some issue that bothers them in some deep personal way that they themselves might not be aware of. And if you're extremely online, somebody is going to poke you in that button without even meaning to necessarily, right? Just sheer volume, and it's going to get to you. So you're going to get fucked one way or the other. So to be prepared for that is a psychological extreme sport.
Yeah, well, on that point, one of the best things that I've done unintentionally was doing Naval's 60-day, 60-minute meditation challenge.
Nice.
And I ended up doing it for like an entire year, basically.
Wow.
Before I started to really go in on this podcast and really go in on posting on Twitter and YouTube and all this stuff. And what I realized from doing that was how I had solved so many of my inner traumas by literally just looking at them, acknowledging them, and giving myself peace for them, and just allowing myself to be like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that was in the back of my brain. And because of that, I'm able to respond to negative things that come at me in a positive way. And like truly positive. Like, I wish that person love. Like, that person's upset at me. Like, it's all good.
Yeah.
And so I have not, and maybe my audience isn't that big, so that I've really been poked that much. And maybe if it expanded rapidly, I would get poked more. But for me, I just have no sense of the trauma of like, no one online can tell me or know me better than I know myself, because I've spent more time with them, with myself than they have ever, because just a piece of content. So how does that land for you?
That's great. I mean, I think that is very healthy, and I don't think it's very common. I think one of the tragedies, and this is a tragedy about like, first of all, it's a tragedy of fame in general, and I don't know how well it translates to online, but I think it's at least the same, if not more so, right? Which is that, people seek out attention and connection and intimacy often because they didn't have it in some way. So there's a lot of the most sensitive people who become artists, musicians, and, who kind of want to connect with someone, right? You make the art because you have a feeling and you want to share that feeling. And if they can be tormented by their success because they do it to be seen and heard, and the big misconception is that becoming a public figure means you will be seen and heard. You will be, but not necessarily on your terms, and not necessarily in the way that you would like. So if you take a big celebrity, it's like and Lady Gaga once tweeted, "Fame is prison," right? And all the replies were, they were so unwilling to consider what she meant, and in so doing, prove her point, right? Because it's like what she's imprisoned by is other people's unwillingness to really try and understand what she's saying. And you can often see, when I was during my COVID days, I was watching a lot of Hot Ones on YouTube, and you can
one of my
always
favorite
see,
podcasts.
right? Sean's great, and so many of the guests, you can see their eyes open up where they're like, "Oh wow, you've done the research. You've actually give a shit about me." And I'm not used to that. They're used to you just have to answer the same question again, and that's just. But yeah, so you were asking about like how does that land for me? So it sounds to me like you have a healthy sense of yourself and kind of what's important to you, blah blah blah. And a lot of the people who like kind of compulsively post online and again, it's not everyone, but like the subset of those who do tend to be the loudest, and so they tend to do the most and get seen the most. They tend to have some neediness about something, which is not a bad thing. Like people have needs, and so they might have some neediness about being understood in a certain way, and that will, it's kind of it's like how hot can you take it, and people always there's always people who are going too far, right? But like it can be a strength if you resolve whatever is the deeper misunderstanding that's troubling you. And I would say that for me, I mostly have managed to do that. I think I felt very unseen and unheard as a teenager or like younger than that. And so I was quite desperate to be like seen and understood on my own terms. And then when people misunderstood me, I took that very personally. I felt like, wow, these people are actively trying to cause me harm, actively trying to like cause me misery and whatever. And so it felt like I'll get emotionally upset. I'll get like, I want to fight basically. And having been through that and then learning and meditating and reflecting, I'm like, okay, it's not about you. Everyone has their own issues, and we all project onto each other. Like we can't know each other from text, because you can't read it. You read it in your voice, not their voice. You don't know what they're saying. And we have like communication is so lossy. We have to like clarify back and forth, and we don't have that. And so it really seems that again, it's like I sometimes want to joke that like it should come with warning labels, but that ship has sailed, or like the genie's out of the bottle. Like we're really kind of as a species trying to educate ourselves about how to communicate better in real time as mortals. It's insane when you really sit down and think about it. It's like nobody can adequately prepare you for life. just this living raw dogging reality, whether it's just scrolling your phone while scrolling through social media, like while you're going to work or whatever, right? Like there's just a lot, and nobody can adequately prepare you for it. And yeah, it's all just we fix it live, right? We just do what we can.
Doggy reality, I love that. What's been the comment or the tweet or the idea that someone's directed at you that's hurt you the most?
Ooh, the things that bother me the most are he's a narcissist, he's a grifter, and
what does grifter mean for those unfamiliar?
Oh yeah, I mean, so I like Venkatesh Rao's formulation, which is that a grifter is someone who profits from a problem without helping to solve the problem. So like you might be, let's say you claim to care about climate change, right? But then you make your money from giving climate change speeches or whatever, and so you don't actually want progress on that front, because then once if it's solved, you no longer have a quote unquote job, right? So it's like you need the problem to continue so that, or is it
bad? Is it bad that the first thing that came to mind was a doctor prescribing Adderall?
Oh, you could say that like the pharmaceuticals is a big grift. It's like it's like just modern healthcare, right? Like it's just not there's no incentive to wean you off like the pharmaceuticals and the treatments and whatever. Which isn't to say that those things don't help, but like it's like the philosophy of it, right? Like and again, like somebody is saying, there was a time once where you might say, oh, there's no news today. Like, you don't need to read anything. Like, it's nothing important. Like, no, the news, the industry's job of the media news industry is, oh, here's this important headlines, breaking news. This is very important. This is very important. But when you reflect on the headlines over a year, you'll be like, oh, there were like 3 big headlines, and then like most of it was not that big. But they put all the headlines at the same scale. So everything is kind of grifty to some degree. But yeah, I mean, actually, I don't think grifter bothers me so much anymore. I don't think narcissist bothers me so much anymore as well. But I was very much, and again, I would say like I'm almost it depends on who's saying it. If it's like a complete stranger, I'm like whatever. But like if it's someone that I thought was a friend or someone that I thought understood me, and it turns out that they see things that way. I mean, I'm open to having a conversation about it. But like the almost insulting thing is that, like, if I wanted to be a grifter narcissist figure, I could do so much worse. I could like it's almost like if you think this is the extent of me being a bad actor, it's like you're underestimating how bad things could be. Like, so like I could write like a playbook on how to be like a successful grifter, which will leave you miserable but successful, right? Which is one of the first things is you got to define an enemy and define people that's okay to be mean to. You just pick out somebody and be like, and then you look for the worst possible examples of those people online and you quote tweet them and you insult them, right? You just look at these stupid people doing terrible things. They are the reason everything is bad. We should. And I mean, I would be a bit more subtle about it. So I wouldn't be like literally say that, right? You can kind of couch it in like this do-gooder, holier than thou, like, oh, these poor, like there's all kinds of things you can do like that. And you can prey on like the most, people who are going, like you can look up like a cult leader, or some people call me a cult leader. That bothers me as well for the same reasons. It's like, if I wanted to, I would do it so much worse. And you prey on people who are going through changes in life, like people who are just got out of a breakup, or people who are feeling suicidal, people who are feeling like this. There are all these people who are very susceptible to influence, and I try my best to kind of discourage that sort of thing. I'm like, okay, like I'm just some guy on the internet. I don't like rely on me for your source of meaning. Don't rely on me as like your savior or whatever. Like I'm just some dude. Chill. Like I take great pains to not be that person. In part because I encountered some of those dynamics when I was younger. I wouldn't say that the people that so I used to play music, and I was like in the local music scene, and every subculture I think has some of these dynamics. They're like some people who are kind of, and we're all emotionally damaged to different degrees or whatever. And there's some people who kind of get swept up in this messianic sort of, I'm the one who provides for everyone else, and the scene is nothing without me, and blah, blah. I saw some of that, and I found it distasteful. I very desperately wanted to, and I saw a bit of myself in it. I think that's the painful, scary, sad truth, is that if I was completely certain that it's not true, it would just be, it's like if someone says, "Ha, you are a white woman," I'm like, no, I mean, okay, if you think so, but I wouldn't feel anything because it's so obviously not true. But if someone says you're a grifter narcissist, I'm like, there's some truth to that maybe, and like I don't want it to be true, and I want to work really hard to make sure that it's not true, and then I get defensive, and it's funny because and the charge of being a narcissist is an especially sticky and tricky one, because if you're trying to defend yourself by explaining why you're not a narcissist, you're still talking about yourself, which is, like, it's very tricky. So you have to talk about something else. And it's not intuitive when you're under attack. Because when you're under attack, the instinct is to defend yourself, right? And so it took some painful experiences, and, I probably, like, soured a couple of friendships, but, like, in trying to defend myself against the thing. And now I learned that, if someone's accusing you of the thing, they are probably having some experience, and they are connecting something that they've seen, or they've seen you say or do, that is reminding them of something else. And like, my friend Malcolm has this great like playbook for how to kind of not let someone else's emotional projections onto you kind of like stick, And the way to do that, you got to be kind of slightly playful, slightly aloof, slightly silly, but not like laugh at them. Like if you laugh at them, you're going to make it worse. So you got to be kind of confused and be like curious, like, oh, why are you saying that? Oh, what makes you say that? Oh, can we talk about that instead? Like and that requires that you be very chill. And to like being very chill when someone is describing you in a way that you have issues with being described, that's very difficult. So you need to go and meditate, right? And reflect on and all of those things. Yeah.
When you're at peace with yourself, it doesn't get stuck to you.
Yeah.
Because you're not valuing the other person's perspective more than your own because you know the truth about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
you
true.
have this quote. It's healthy to know nobody really knows anybody else. We barely even know ourselves.
Know ourselves, yeah.
We project some image, we have some story, and that can change. And that's why I honestly feel like writing and meditating is such an important practice.
Yeah.
Because it's getting to know yourself when all of my life, at least, is externally facing. And here are the things you should think. And people listening to this podcast right now are like, they're listening to the thoughts we have about the world. Yeah. And some of those thoughts, they're saying, oh, now those are my thoughts too. But maybe they should, maybe it's helpful to turn off the podcast and be like, what do I think about myself in this moment, and see what pops up?
Yeah. Yeah. It's always interesting. I like to describe it as consult your inner newsfeed, right? Because everyone wakes up in the morning like, oh, what's on the newsfeed today? And the thing is, there is an inner newsfeed that you have that withers away when you come in contact with the external newsfeed. So it's like it's difficult to be like, I'm gonna check Twitter and then I'm gonna check myself. Like it's hard because whatever you just seen on Twitter is gonna now trigger new thoughts and associations and connections in yourself. So, so I think Salvador Dali, what he used to do was he would take a nap with like a coin in his hand or something, and he'll like micro nap, and then he'd drop the coin into the bowl, like a loud bowl. Then he'll wake up like, oh, and then he'll remember whatever it was he was dreaming about, and then he'd paint it immediately. And because once you stop to think, or once you've had, and I've also noticed some of my most interesting threads happen like when I wake up in the middle of the night, at like midnight or whatever. And there's something about the thoughts that you have when you have not yet been exposed to other people that I think is very precious. And you could, and I'm thinking about it on like a daily scale. You can also think of it like, so young children, there's this poetry teacher who describes how young children write better poetry than slightly older children because their language is still very private and personal, and it hasn't yet been. So the phrase she uses was, older kids have a more thoroughly socialized consciousness, where we use words that mean the same things as other people, and it's part of life, right? Like as you get older, you become a teenager, you care about your peers. You should. It's healthy part of development. And that's why, people like Picasso say things like, the challenge for an artist is to kind of remain a child as you grow up, like to have that pre-socialized consciousness. And yeah, so that's the very tricky thing about like society in general. It's like, we want the fruits of these sort of pre-socialized or sort of alien consciousness that is separate from the kind of mainstream consensus. And it's very beautiful if you think about it, because it's like the thoughts that you have in private away from everyone else, they seem to resonate with the other thoughts that everyone else has in private that nobody seems to be able to articulate communally in public. And it's like, there's this interesting like paradox, yin yang thing going on.
Well, that reminds me of you saying or tweeting, everyone wants to be fuckable, but no one wants to fuck.
It's something like that, yeah.
And I was like, and then you have like 20 examples of the ways in which that is true.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I just never thought about it like that. And it's like,
yeah,
where does something like that stem from? Where do your most creative ideas stem from?
It's always surprise, and it's funny, like the thing that I am currently in, I have these cycles where I start to take myself too seriously and then it doesn't work out, and then I kind of get pissed off at myself, or I'm fuck this, and then like something interesting happens somewhere else. So like yesterday, I was like frustrated with myself for not writing. I've been trying to work on some essays and none of them are satisfying me. And I was kind of goofing off from that and playing guitar for a while with no goal or intention. And I found myself coming up with like 5 song ideas that were like uncommonly good relative to what I usually come up with. And the thing is, I used to try and write songs, and this was underwhelming. I wasn't happy with any of them. And similarly, it's like, which is part of why I like Twitter, is because I can have a conversation with someone, and then I notice myself saying something interesting in that conversation, and then I'm like, oh, that'll be a good tweet, and then I tweet it. Right? So I've never like sat down with nothing on my mind, and then I'm like, what would be a good tweet? And then think of a good tweet and then write it. No, it's always in the middle of something else, like in media res, right? Like I'm always, so all my creative, and I think I have a thread somewhere about creativity, and I say that, so David Ogilvy has a quote that's like, make your thinking as funny as possible. The best ideas come as jokes. And similarly, it's like, you come up with good phrases when you're trying to explain something else. And then it's like, because your brain is focused on where you're going, you're not really paying attention to like the path that you're taking, because you just have the destination in mind. And then like it's almost like you take a secret shortcut back alley path, and that back alley path turns out to be the really cool and interesting thing. But you weren't trying to be interesting, you're just trying to get somewhere. And the interestingness comes out as a proxy. So I guess the way to be creative is, I can't believe I'm answering the question of the way to be creative, because I have been in a bit of a rut lately. And I know why.
Yeah.
It's that I'm trying to do a thing, and I never do things while trying to do things. I always do things by accident or like sideways, like while having a conversation with a friend. You know, that's very, very reliably I come up with interesting things in conversations with friends. So that's for me. You know, maybe some people are different. Maybe some people just need to like. For someone else, that might be like the completely wrong advice. Maybe, I don't know, but like it's always these kind of like surprise moments or surprise challenges. Even I really like Brian Eno's story about like the Windows opening sound, like the 3-second dun 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 whatever. Like he is saying he got the brief, and he was in a creative rut at the time. He's making music, like this atmospheric music stuff, and then he got a pitch from Microsoft, right, or whoever at Microsoft hired whoever, and they said, oh, you know, we need this song, or we need this piece of music from you. It has to be uplifting and all these adjectives, right? Like uplifting, profound, professional, blah blah blah, and it has to be like 3.25 seconds long. And he was saying just that strange constraint was so funny that he felt like, okay, so you've given me a weird request. It's something funny. Let me try it. And so because it's such a short amount of space, he's like, he made like 70 or 80 different attempts. And he said it's like making a little jewel, right? And it's so different than making a song. And he said that when he was done with that, he then returned to his own work, and he's like, wow, now it's like a 3-minute song
so
feels
much
like an ocean of time, right? And yeah, you know, so it's like to write something interesting, introducing constraints, I think is a very great creative challenge. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to continue on that. I have to pee so badly.
Sure.
I want to talk to you a little more about this creative rut you're in, because someone tweeted me yesterday, actually, or in the past week, and I was in a bad one. This is a weird coincidence timing thing, too, because I had COVID in December, and then I was in a rut for about a month. And someone tweeted me, and they were like, it's crazy that the things that you created while you were in a rut helped me.
Oh, right.
And so it's like, I don't know if I'm explaining this well, because they were pointing out the fact that while I was in a rut, I had created things previously that were helping them. And so similar to you, it's like you're in a rut right now, but there are things that you've created that are helping people right now, even though you're currently in a rut. And there's something beautiful about that.
Right. I even have a specific couple of essays. So if you go to my Substack, like the first one I thought was really good. And it was probably really good because I was like stewing on it while I was working on my book. So it was basically all the stuff that I cared about that I couldn't put in my book because it's not related. So it came out instant. It just flowed all at once. And then after that, I'm like, okay, there's so much more I want to do. And then I'm stuck. And so the second thing I did was I just listed out all the essays that I wanted to write, like the ideas of the essays that I wanted to write, but I couldn't seem to do justice to. which I felt shitty about. I felt like this is not really. It's like it's almost like I'm apologizing as the artist for. And I know that's not true, but like it felt like that for me. Like it's like I'm an artist on stage, and people have showed up, and I'm like, I got nothing. I don't have anything to show you guys today, but like here's all the things that I'm kind of working on, and then so it's kind of like a show, but like a non-show, and there's that, and then the one after that was like a couple of months later, and I'm like, I'm just frustrated because I don't want to do stuff, and so I wrote an explanation about why I don't want to write, and like me talking myself through it, like, okay, why do I not feel like it? What's bothering me? How do I wish things were? Blah blah. And the responses to both of those essays, people were so grateful, I guess. They were like, oh, it's so nice to see that one, you struggle with stuff. You don't seem like the kind of guy who would struggle with stuff. And another one was like, it made me feel less alone, and like I'm like, oh shit, like I was then reflecting on the fact that if I had never been in a rut, my audience would then not know me as a human being, right? They would know me as the guy who, oh my god, that fucking irritating guy who just keeps putting out banger after banger. And it was humanizing for me to realize that if I could have a choice between being Mr. Bangers 24/7 or being the human who sometimes gets in ruts, I would rather be known as the human who sometimes gets in ruts. I don't want to be like this, have this illusion of perfection that's never frustrated. And yeah, but at the same time, I don't want to do like 5 more essays about that. I'm like, let me out. Yeah.
Well, to quote you, when you get down/depressed, you ask yourself, who do I want in my life? And I thought that was such a useful framing.
It is.
And I wish I had that statement in my mind when I was in darker times of my life. And inevitably, I'm sure I will in the future as well, because that's the nature of life. But who do I want in my life is a useful framing for being down.
I'll go so far as to, I'll really bet for this one. I'll feel like it's the best. I don't think there's from it you can derive everything else. Like you can derive an entire like philosophy of how to live your life, and you can derive an entire sense of what your values are. And maybe it's a proxy. Maybe it's almost like, because we know that the human brain is like, it became big for social reasons. Like, like primarily our way of thinking is social, which is also probably why like pantheons in the past were all anthropomorphized. I can never say that word properly. Anthropomorphized. Like just humans, right? You imagine that Olympus has human gods. You look at lightning and there must be a guy in the sky with the lightning, or like whatever. It's just I don't think people were literal about it, or like entirely literal about it. I think there's a dismissal that happens when you look at people from the past and you're like, oh, they must be stupid. But no, I think it's more interesting to consider that they were about as intelligent as we were, and they were just using the technologies and like storytelling technologies that they had. And I mean, I'm sure there would have been some literalists, but I think the thoughtful people were using it as like an analogy or like a metaphor for making sense of phenomena. Anyway, that's one of my that's an essay I've been meaning to write, and I'm still finding the right frame on it. But yeah, people are. It's funny how people underestimate people as a not as a tool, but like just it's so obvious that it goes unsaid, right? That people are good. We're not meant to be solitary, robotic. We're humans, right? And humans, human best with other humans.
Well, you saying that makes me think of this idea that everyone knows about the Stanford prison experiment, and how like once you look at someone else as the other, you like have some semblance of like greater than to them in some way. And I've never once thought about people of the past. We often think about people of the past as the other. Oh, those people were so dumb, or oh, those people were so prehistoric for this reason or that reason. They didn't have access to an iPhone. They didn't have internet. They must be dumb or whatever, right? But we constantly do that with people in the past of calling them the other. And I've never thought about that before. So interesting point.
That's reminding me of something else. Like a teacher who's been teaching for like 50 years. Somebody was asking her like, oh, what's different or what's funny or interesting about kids these days? And she said the funny thing is, Kids underestimate the degree to which the technology that they use today was like, they kind of very quickly take for granted that, doesn't everyone have like phones? Or I mean, intellectually they know that, okay, in the past people might not have phones, but like they kind of assume that
it was always there.
They hold it constant.
Chills.
Yeah, but it's very cute that like every new batch of teenagers think that they're the first ones to fall in love, right? Or the first ones to have drama with their friends and they can't get along and there's a misunderstanding that ruins a friendship. When that is like I highly recommend everyone look up the graffiti at Pompeii. And like, I have a Twitter thread where I just tweet each piece of graffiti from Pompeii. When you lay it out in a Twitter thread, it looks exactly like the timeline today. It's like somebody's pining over a lover, somebody's showing off how many girls he slept with. Someone else is like, today I baked bread. And someone else is like, oh, here's a curse of whatever. It's so universal. And yeah, another thing I recommend is looking up like great apes documentaries and stuff, like baboons, and like they are so human. Like they have deceit and they have drama and they get jealous and they're like, mammals, or even having a cat. Before I was a pet owner, I used to think that, so my only exposure to cats in the past was like street cats. I'm like, they're just street creatures. Like it's not like how complex can they be? But so now I have two cats and it's like, they have such complex emotions. You can see it. Like they have like guilt and shame, and they get playful, they get angry, they get this. Then there's all this stuff going on, and it's like, oh, okay, wow, like human, like this primates even, right? Like mammals have all these emotions. You can sense it. People think like dogs can tell what you're feeling, right?
Yeah. Could you imagine a world in which we could more clearly understand what animals were thinking?
Yeah.
Or saying, like, how would that impact the world?
That would be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Something worth thinking about. I've watched a great documentary on that. I don't know if it's true, but it's called, I believe, like The Animal Whisperer. Let me look it up to make
like
sure.
Like someone who can really.
Yeah. I watched
Val Hart.
The woman who can talk to animals, a real wild documentary. 51 minutes. I watched it alone.
Plausible.
I watched it alone. I was completely convinced, and then I watched it with my grandfather, who then told me he doesn't believe it at all. So it's good to have the dual perspective on it.
Yeah, I'm I wouldn't be like, oh, that's definitely true, or like, it's always possible that we, so we are very good at deluding ourselves about things that we want to be true. But at the same time, there's also all sorts of nuance that that not everyone is good at. I remember reading about, so in Robin Dunbar, the guy who came up with Dunbar's number 150, he has a book called Gossip, Grooming, and the Evolution of Language. And he argues that language basically evolved as like verbal grooming. So like animals monkeys, they'll like pick at each other's fur, right, to kind of show care and concern. And then language becomes a way to do that without touching. And he described this thing where like a couple of monkeys were like collaborating to kind of deceive another monkey of something else. And it's just this very elaborate social strategy. And when I was reading that, I'm like, there are living adults today in modern society who I am sure do not currently possess that level of like social finesse. And it's not that they're stupid or, like intellectually incapable of it, but it's probably more that the environment that they live in does not require them to cultivate those skills. And you can see this and so I would contrast this with like street children in slums, like in Mumbai or in Africa. There are these places where very young children are basically left to fend for themselves, and they raise each other. And you can see in their eyes. You can watch a video if you watch videos about street kids, you can see in their eyes that they're like calculating, they're really thinking, and they are, and it's kind of slightly creepy because you're used to thinking of children as cute and kind of being harmless and that's partially, and you start to realize, oh, like part of that must be that children are performing for their parents, like they're performing weakness and they're performing cuteness, and it's indulgent in a way to not have to care about survival. And then you think about like the archetype of like the wealthy fail son, right? Like the son of the emotionally stunted like son of a billionaire, for example, who he's never gonna need to get a job. He's never gonna need to, like, everything in his life is kind of taken care of, except his like emotional psychological development, right? And my friend Xiao Chu, he wrote a thread a while ago about his experience. His parents, I wouldn't say his parents are like super fucking rich, but like they're well off, and he was describing how the truth of his parents' kind of financial condition meant that he would never have to care about money, basically. And the primary thing that he has to care about is actually his emotional relationship with his parents. And there's a infantilization that happens there, sort of. And it's just, it's remarkable to kind of read about and think about from a place of curious openness and so on. But like, you post that on Twitter and people are like, oh my god, fucking rich boy whining online and blah blah blah. And so he got a lot of shit for it, and he handled it very well. But like, I just think it's interesting to examine all of the different ways there are of being human and how different contexts shape our development and how we think about achievement, how we think about hard work, how we think about, money, all of these things. It's just a lot. Yeah.
It also makes me think about, it's weird how like we've deemed certain people when they reach certain places don't deserve to talk about their problems in one way or another. Like athletes, like, oh, you're an athlete, what are you complaining about? Or billionaires or children of billionaires, like, or people with a lot of clout on Twitter, whatever it is, like,
sure, yeah.
It's funny how we've just deemed a certain class of people as like, oh, they've made it in this area, so therefore we don't want to hear their problems, type of thing.
Yeah. I would love to like witness someone like, let's say, Arnold Schwarzenegger just complaining about his day. It's like, I have all this, like, he's rich and successful and blah, blah, blah. But like, he surely has problems. Everyone has problems, right? And it's just, Or like Tim Cook. Imagine Tim Cook, like, just bitching about his day. He's just, like, this is like a CEO of a big company. Or like
I don't want to be
I would
here.
love to hear. I would love to hear that shit. It's just...
Well, and that's why people appreciate you when you write about your ruts. Because in some sense, they're feeling like, oh, wow, like, they're putting you on a pedestal in that moment, and they're like, wow, it's a human being. And the reason why we're attracted to Arnold Schwarzenegger or Tim Cook complaining about their problems is because, like, oh, that's a human being. In my mind, I don't think of that as a human being. I think of that as an extraordinary human. Superstar. Yeah. So what can we do to make the world a more loving and compassionate place?
I always recommend that people start like with themselves and with like their friends, and like just in a very immediate, intimate, personal way. So more loving and more compassionate. I would say that. So I think I've come around to being like, people who are not struggling with constraints or with whatever. Like I almost think that's the wrong question. I almost think that love and compassion are things that people very naturally want to do, but they tend to get in their own way or get in each other's way, or like, society gets in our way. That and I think there's this, I don't know if it was a psychological experiment or whatever, but like there's this thing where people who are in a rush to get somewhere are less likely to stop and help someone than people who are not, right? So it's like, if you can be in less of a rush, then you would be more free and open to be present in the... I mean, I don't know. There's many different angles to approach it. I as I say this out loud, I'm like wondering, that's just part of the picture, But
I love watching your tweets happen in real time in audio and video. This is a live
that's basically,
look.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
This is great.
How to be?
Why is that? Why is it the wrong question?
No, it's not necessarily the wrong question. It's a question. It's a valid question. But okay, so when I was writing Introspect, for example, right, I started out trying to answer the question of how do you figure out what you want in life, or like just like what people keep asking me, like how do you know what you want? And I'm very confident that is, it's not necessarily a universally wrong question, but it's typically a wrong question because and the way I would approach explaining that is like very young children very very seldom have a problem explaining what they want. Like they want candy, or they want to go to the playground, or they want to play. Like young kids don't have. And I suggested an idea for a funny. I think I even asked I asked my friends who are parents. Have you ever had your young child say that they don't know what they want, and like ask you for advice on, like, you know, this? So this goes back to the socialized consciousness thing, which is that I think every life form from a very young age knows what it wants and what it doesn't want, right? And so like want and not want are like the most deepest emotions, right? It's like the fear and desire, you know, love and hate, or aversion, whatever. And initially we start with those very simple drives, but then we start to like intellectualize and simulate like outcomes. And this happens like when you're kids, teenagers, whatever, and you start thinking, oh, you know, I want to play music, but my friends think music is lame, so I don't want my friends to laugh at me. Therefore, I mean, so at the most basic levels, it's still okay. But once you start telling yourself things like, maybe I don't really want to play music at all, and that becomes a habit, and you as that compounds over and over again, people eventually get divorced from their desires and fears and whatever. You start living in this, and it doesn't feel like it. That's the tricky thing. It doesn't feel like you're living in a simulation. It just feels like you're doing what seems obvious. But so people get detached from their desires, and then what happens is some people start to try and intellectualize, like, oh, what would I like to desire, or what desires would be lucrative or whatever. And then you it's like there was a core desire at the heart, but then it's been blocked up by just blockers, whether it's fear or whatever. And then you try and build something else on top of that, and that thing is not connected to the core personal drive. So it's almost a distraction from the truth. It's almost a sort of illusion. And so if you're now at that 2 layers out and you're trying to figure out what you want, you're going to go off on a search that maybe, if you're lucky, it'll bring you back to the center, but it most likely won't, right? Because the way to get to the center is you have to face whatever it is that you were afraid of, and whatever it is that was... and the thing is, when you ask a casual person in casual conversation, let's say you just met someone at a party and you're like, hey, so what are you afraid of? Like, they might not be even able to tell you the truth, because
it's too deep. It's too deep. It's too far into the subconscious, and they haven't looked at it.
And it's rational for them to have defenses against giving that information to a stranger, because what are you going to do with that info? And so it's like, you know, when you're always surrounded by people that you don't really trust that much, or you're not really sure if you can trust, and maybe you don't even trust yourself that much, and so it becomes this very opaque ball, and all the desires are inside that opaqueness, right? And so so the question that people should be asking is kind of like how am I blocking myself? But it's tricky. It's like trying to see in your blind spot. You can't really see it. It's a very, very tricky game. I think that how I solved it, or I gave myself a sort of solution, is to be as prolific as you can. So basically, you know, the mind has a self-clouding fog of safety. It's a safety fog. You hide your desires and your fears from yourself so that you don't get like burnt by them, and you need to earn your own trust to let the fog dissipate. And I mean, there's other tricksy, clever ways you can try and do it. One way is to be prolific and write a lot and say a lot and talk to a lot of people, because when you go fast enough I highly recommend stream of consciousness journaling, or you're just recording a conversation, just talking really, really fast, or like such you don't stop to think, just keep saying shit, and you can actually outrun your internal critic. There's an internal critic that's like, oh, you can't say that, oh, you shouldn't, that's not right, that's not normal, that's socially awkward, that's socially whatever. If you go really, really fast, or maybe try writing fiction, right? Like there's all these little hacky things you can do where it's like, if you go fast and you go weird in strange directions, because you can never truly be random. Like you're when you're trying to generate randomness, you'll generate stuff based on what you care about, right? And yeah, so one of the things I suggest in my book Introspect is you can, especially if you've been like posting on Facebook or Instagram or whatever for like a few years and you haven't been thinking about it, you can go back and look at your old Facebook statuses over a few years, and it will reveal stuff to you that was not apparent to you in that moment. You know, it's like,
I love Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. No, so every day on Twitter, people say shit that is incredibly revealing that they don't realize that they're doing. And sometimes this goes back to what I was saying earlier about like, you know, it's crazy that we are raw dogging reality, right? It's like you will see someone accidentally admit to something that they don't realize that they're admitting to, and it's even more intimate than like seeing naked pictures or whatever. It's like someone's just, you know, it's like,
what's an example? Not putting anyone on blast, but just like an idea.
I'm trying to figure out abstract. It's funny. It's almost like my brain is hesitant to let me remember the examples. But like one thing I vaguely recall is there's a guy, and there's several guys like this, and I think it might actually be common enough that it's not, even if I say it, it's like you can't really tell who it is because it's so common. It's like people whose parents, their relationship with their parents informs their attitude towards dating. Which is like, when you say it like that, it's like, oh yeah, obviously, for sure. But like, when you see people arguing about dating, oh, men are like this, women are like that, it's often like, oh, my mom cheated on my dad, and then my dad got a substance abuse problem, and he like had an overdose and he died, so I don't trust women anymore. Like, holy shit. I mean, like, so that he won't say that in the context of discussing gender discourse, but you'll see it in like a reply to something else. Like, oh yeah, you know, my dad this, that, and you're like, holy shit, that explains all of the other thing. But it's like, if you point at that, that's you being rude, right? So it's like we politely agree to not connect those dots. But and everything is like this, right? Everybody has some shit that's troubling them that they might not realize is troubling them, and like, so, you know, being compassionate is about not rubbing their faces in it. But even, I mean, I don't know. I think most people are too swept up in their own nonsense to really notice when other people are bearing their souls unrealizingly.
That's true.
There's one that I remember. Somebody was when we're talking about lockdowns, and I don't even know this person. It's like in some separate thread. There's a thread about lockdowns, and I think there was a news article about how it seems like children are like not socializing well because of COVID stuff, whatever. And then somebody was like, oh, you know, I was like, and I think the word, there was some phrasing there that was like severely, I don't know if severely, but anyway, the person replied something like, you know, my parents isolated me at home and I turned out fine, and like I went through, like they started listing out textbook abuse. And they were saying that it was not. And they were justifying to themselves that, oh, I'm fine. Like, why are all these snowflake kids, whatever. And you're like, oh, dude, like, you might need to get that. You might need to talk to someone about that. You know, it's like there's some shit going on there. Yeah, and I guess people are often trying to justify something to themselves. And, you know, if you want to be mean to them, you can, but it's like, once you see how things are and see how people are and how precious everything is, it's like, oh man, like how can I help? You know, how can I, you know? And very often when there are two people having a fight, I think I have like a joke tweet about this. It's like, Twitter is this free for all, which is like, you know, my childhood fucks your childhood, like, you know, in a street fight or whatever. And it's like, yeah, you know, like two people seem to be having a very strong, heated argument about, something like, let's say, remote work or something. I don't know. This is some arbitrary thing. And you're like, why are you guys going at this? Like, okay, you have a disagreement, but you're like tearing at each other dramatically. And then you're like, there has to be something going on. Like, do you really care that much about whether or not like some other guy wants to hire something? And then you're like, oh, this person was like unfairly treated by their boss like last year, and that boss told them that they will never be successful because something else, and then so they are having that fight with this stranger, right? And so like Twitter sometimes it's almost like it's like a fight club for this sort of thing where everyone politely agrees to not discuss specifics and they just blow off steam by yelling at each other about unrelated things. It's just funny to
It's funny that I often see that with like people who tweet or just people in general who say things in a very polarized manner without nuance. And that's part of why I love what you do so much, is like there's so much nuance involved in everything. And like, you're like, this is why I'm wrong. This is why. And to me, that's a huge sign of intelligence and a huge sign of just being comfortable with like the unknown in a way.
Yeah. And I think, the tragedy of tweeting in polarized ways is that you attract polarized thinkers and people who,
and you also get more engagement.
Yeah. And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like the more you describe things with aggressive confidence, the more you get into that. So much so that I would actually say that it's a healthy practice where even if you're quite sure of yourself, like just describe it as if you're not. And you do that often enough and it seeps into your language. And I think that's healthy. I think it's healthy to just introduce uncertainty and doubt in most things.
Yeah. And it's also really interesting. What happened to me last night was someone who I really respect was telling me about all the things that I'm doing that are wrong. And has that ever happened to you? Like they do it in a kind and loving way, but like, all right, you're doing this and you should be doing this. And you're like my brain is exploding. Like, and I felt so grateful for me to be able to just like consider the possibility and the likelihood that they're correct. But it was a very humbling experience in a lot of ways. Has that ever happened to you? Where someone you respect tells you something.
I guess my ex-boss, so I've tweeted about my ex-boss a bunch, Dinesh. And I mean, it wouldn't be so much as like he tells me that I'm doing stuff that's wrong, but like we would have, so his conversations with him were very Socratic. Like he'd just ask me what I'm trying to do, and if I think that what do I think the outcome of the thing that I'm doing is going to be, and like what would it look like if I tried something different. Like he was very patient about, which is why I worked for him for so long, because he was like this guru sort of, and he was paying me, and the interesting thing is because I'm his employee, right? He's very much invested in me actually becoming better at executive function. So he's not, so like, I think a challenge with therapy sometimes is that the therapist is not necessarily incentivized to get you to level up soon, right? Or get you, I mean, it depends on the specifics, and every person is different and whatever. But like, I really enjoyed the context where the person who is coaching me directly benefits from my like growth, and so it's like a win-win thing.
Yeah. Also on that point, real quick, it's like sometimes in therapy, the thing that you want and what the therapist wants are different, and the therapist and you might not realize that. For example, let's say in the case of like fitness, and you're really getting your fitness in check, you do 6 days a week of therapy, 6 days a week of fitness. The therapist could say, well, that might be too much. Like you might be doing it overboard, but like in order to get you into the frame of mind of doing it correctly, you need to do it. But you and the therapist don't see eye to eye on that, or don't acknowledge that difference. And so what's nice in the case that you're describing with the mentor is like, the incentives seem to be more clearly aligned.
And I mean, so I don't know if I necessarily would want that same relationship with someone else at this stage in my life, but like, and now I enjoy having, I would say, relationships with peers, rather, like people who are doing similar things in different domains, and then we can kind of talk shop about that. But so whether we're talking about like fitness coaches or mentors or whatever, I'm reminded of Alan Watts described it as like I don't know if he called it the advice problem, or I call it the advice problem but whatever. So let's call it Alan Watts' advice problem, which is that you always, I guess ultimately you cannot escape responsibility for yourself and your experience. And like, so earlier I was saying that I had an experience with a fitness coach who was so good that I trusted him. But like, even then, it's like you cannot completely relinquish. You can relinquish it like in the context of a session, and then after the session, you have to sit back and be like, okay, was that good for me? Was it not? What do I want? Because if you completely relinquish all responsibility for yourself to someone else, I mean that's basically what happens in cults, you know. And like, even if the leader is good, and a good leader wouldn't absolve you of responsibility for yourself, you know, because that's part of a person's development. You have to take responsibility for yourself. And so with advice, you always have to still ask yourself, is this relevant to me or not? Like, am I going to listen to this person? So if two different people give contradictory advice, you then have to ask yourself, like, who should I listen to? Or maybe they're both correct in some ways and they're both wrong in some ways. And like, if you decide, okay, I'm going to listen to this guy and not that guy, like, that's a choice that you are making. And it's ultimately the responsibility for that choice lies with you, right? And so there's a humor in real, and this is a bit of I guess a radical self-sovereignty kind of frame. And I've been in this frame for a few years now, so like I forget sometimes that for some people who are new to that way of thinking, it can be kind of psychologically painful, I guess. Like it's like it does feel that there can be a phase of, oh my god, there's no structure in the world, or like whatever structure there is in the world, I don't know if I can trust it. Like, it's very alienating and isolating. It's like this belly of the whale going into the deep desert away from everyone and feeling really lonely and like, oh my god, I can't really, like, maybe my parents love me, but even then, like, I don't know if I can trust them to not blah blah blah. Like, I'm truly responsible for myself. Oh god, it's so overwhelming. Like, there is that, and I do want to honor how difficult and painful that is. And I want to reassure people that you spend some time there and it's lonely or whatever, but then when you have kind of endured that, you then start to notice other people who also have endured that. And the relationships you build with those people are so much better than like codependent relationships where both people are like have abdicated some responsibility for themselves. And yeah, it's that's just the thing I just felt like I want to say. Like, you know, it's like there is an alienation and loneliness in realizing what it means to be truly responsible for yourself, like radically, completely responsible for yourself. But when you endure that for some time, and you don't, I mean, even when you're going through that, you can still talk to people. You know, you don't have to like go and be a monk in a monastery or whatever. But once you have kind of accepted that, then when you can start to see who are the people who also make that choice, and the kinship that you have with those people is so much stronger than like casual happenstance kind of friendships. Yeah.
Who are some examples in your own life of those people?
Examples of people in my life who are like that. Who do I point to? Well, so in my life, I would say my wife is like that. But among like online on Twitter, YouTube, I mentioned my friend Malcolm earlier. I think Malcolm Ocean. So he's someone that I think went through some similar transformation of his own like that. And a common feature for the thing that I'm describing is that people have to leave a social environment that meant a lot to them. And so it's like very often people who are like, for some reason, I have a lot of ex-Mormons in my, just around me. Like, I seem to draw them to me. And so, people who leave religious groups, people who leave careers. Like, I know ex-lawyers, several different ex-lawyers. And it's like, you had this pre-existing structure that once meant a lot to you, but something about it bothered you or troubled you, and you decided to leave it. And you know, it's very like in Lion King, like there's the 3-act structure. Like at the end of Act 1, Simba has to leave Pride Rock, and like he goes off to Hakuna Matata, and again, it's really the hero's journey kind of thing where you have to leave the village, right? And again, it's a metaphor, and you can see how that plays out in, you know, before you're born, you're in the womb, and the womb is the structure that you're in, and then you have to break that shell and come out. I mean, and now the new womb is the family unit, you and your mom and your dad and whatever. And then you grow up, and then you have to leave that the comfort of that family unit, and you have to make friends with other kids. And then now you have that social environment, and then you have the friend group that you care about a lot, and like all the homies or whatever. But that too is a kind of comfort zone that eventually you have to realize, oh no, we're all just, there's like a ringleader or whatever, and we're all just a bunch of losers, kind of enabling each other's bullshit. And then you're like, okay, I gotta get away from these guys, and then you leave the group chat or whatever it is, and then it's just, there's this concentric, you're like, at some point you start questioning, like, what's the culture that I'm in, what's the country that I'm in, what's the all these things, and then you just kind of progressively keep leaving the groups. And the thing is, it's not that you leave and you abandon them forever, but the point is to kind of experience separation so that you can get to know who you are away from the tribe, away from the whatever, and that allows you to come back and re-engage with a fresh understanding that isn't about dependence and isn't about like you have no choice but to whatever. So now you can be really honest with people, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna insult people and kind of put them down or whatever, but like you can, it's like that, is that pause between stimulus and response, right? It's the being able to, and to do that you have to kind of get out of the cycle of stimulus response, stimulus response, stimulus response. Be like, stimulus, okay, pause, take a breath, and then like to be able to do that you have to step away from the automatic thing. Yeah, I don't know why I just went on that rant, but it's a thing that I've been thinking about.
What's the tattoo you have there? It's almost like a circle.
It's a labyrinth. It's a classical
labyrinth.
Yeah, so I got it.
Yeah, well,
as
it's funny. It's funny because that is kind of like, in a way, what you're describing. Like you're going from one circle, which is the womb, all the way to
that's correct. Yeah,
questioning the country or whatever.
That's exactly it. So my second book, Introspect, it initially was about I started out trying to answer the question people asking me about, like, how do I figure out what I want? How do I know myself better? Blah, blah, blah. And I went through many, many drafts of it. And eventually I settled on, okay, this book is going to be about like a hero's journey into yourself and like renegotiating your self-concept. And so then like the labyrinth motif just jumped out at me as a thing that, you know, it looks like the brain as well. It's a whole bunch of interesting things about labyrinths that, you know, you can do a whole separate podcast about. But like, yeah, in Westworld, they use it to represent the brain. And it's just, the idea of layers and the idea that you can get lost in it and you need like a ball of thread to go in and come back out. And there's a minotaur at the heart of it. So at the heart of the labyrinth is a minotaur who is the monster that is shunned by, I mean, so if you read the folklore originally, I don't really want to get into this, too much details, but the idea is that there is this monster in the family that is shunned and hidden in the center of the labyrinth. And, you know, I would say if you've watched like Black Panther, Killmonger, the villain, he is, T'Challa's father says he is the truth I chose to omit. You know, he's the black child, the black sheep of the family. He's the embarrassment of the family. Like we shun him, right? Or we pretend that he doesn't exist. And in so doing, you create the villain. You know, like he becomes a villain because he has been like separated from his tribe. And saying this, I felt similarly about if you watch Encanto, there's this character Bruno, and there's a whole song that's like, we don't talk about Bruno, right? He is the black sheep of the family. And in Thor Ragnarok, like Hela, the sister, she is the black sheep of the family. Like every family seems to have someone who is cast out or someone who is shunned, someone who is, and you know, in every community there is some, you know, it scales all the way up and all the way down, right? There are the things that we are ashamed of, the things that we feel are too terrible to talk about, too grotesque, too evil, and whatever. And the shunning makes it worse. You know, if you ask me, I think in modern society, the way we talk about what we quote unquote incels, I think that's kind of that. Like you label some people as the problem, and they might be a problem, but you know, it's
the other.
The shunning
it goes back
help,
to the other.
I think. Yeah. And so, but I don't want to talk about like social problems because that's like way bigger, whatever. But like within the context of an individual, we each shun some part of ourselves. You know, we feel like, oh, and it's like, and it made me realize, you know, I used to be kind of, I don't know if I would flinch, but just kind of, when I hear things like self-love, I'm like, that sounds, it sounds cutesy, right? It sounds like bubble baths and cotton candy and indulgence. And I'm like, I don't give a shit about that. But when I was researching my book, I came to think of self-love is not about the cute stuff. It's about really the parts of yourself that you are really ashamed about. Like when you've disappointed your family and your friends, or you've broken promises and you fucked up and you're kind of cruel to yourself about that. Or whatever else, like for some people it's like sex-related stuff, like they're ashamed about that. For some people it's anger issues, whatever. There's just something that feels dangerous, grotesque or whatever, and so we lock that minotaur up inside our hearts or inside or wherever. We just like put it away, and that shunning is a kind of injustice and cruelty. And it's an understandable cruelty. It's like the same. I mean, the same reason we have prisons and whatever, right? Like it's tragic that we have systems where we shun, the mentally ill, or we shun, violent, or whatever. And it's understandable why they do it. I'm not saying that we should just open everything up and be whatever. And so that's one of the insights in my book, which is that you likely have a good reason for why you have self-shunned whatever it is that you have self-shunned. It's not that you're an idiot. It's not that you're a vindictive, cruel person who's... it gets meta, because if you feel guilt about what you've done to yourself or whatever, it just gets worse. So it's like there's this redemption, forgiveness. I'm not particularly religious, but I'm interested in how religions work, and like the whole the redemption of Christ and Christ died for your sins or whatever. It's kind of an cultural innovation for forgiveness on that front. Like if you're really done properly, that's what it should be. In practice, anyway. But like, yeah, so you come to terms with what you have done to yourself and the truth of why you've done it. And you try to, I have a phrase in the book that's like, put the gun down, which is like, which is just, I'm not, whatever it is that you've done, like, you might not be able to resolve it in a day or a month or even a year, but like you can decide that you are not going to coerce yourself any further. So it might be that you have to have conversations with the minotaur within yourself, right? About like, hey, like, I'm sorry that you're here, right? Like, or what it manifests differently for different people. But, what was it for me when I was doing? So while I was writing the book, I had to like reconfront my issues, which was which made writing the book very difficult. But like, I knew that would happen because I wanted the book to be honest, and like, so it's like I would wake up in the morning wanting to write the book, and like I would have my morning coffee, whatever. And then I would sit down, scroll through it for a while, and okay, time to start writing the book. And like within 10 minutes, I would be narcoleptic. I'd be like, oh my god, I need to take a nap at like 10 a.m. in the morning after having slept a full night. And so I'd go to the sofa and I'd sleep. And I would have like weird, vivid dreams. And now in retrospect, I suspect that it's actually, those dreams were like necessary. It's like, I don't know what the neurology of it actually is, but I think there's something about reconsolidating emotional experiences and memories and stuff. There's something about the neurology of memory and trauma and fear and all of those things. And so, and it gets reconsolidated in sleep. So it does seem that when you want to process difficult memories or whatever, you need to sleep. But anyway, writing that book, and so when I finished that book, I don't know if you want to hear more about the Minotaur stuff, but when I finished the book, I got the tattoo to commemorate that experience. I'm like, okay, I've learned how to, I've gone into my own labyrinth, I've confronted my own Minotaur, I've written about the process, and I want to guide other people through it as well. And it's kind of, I think of it as like it's a very shamanic thing to do, to guide someone else through that process. And doing it in a book is harder than doing it like in conversation, because you can't ask questions of the reader, so you have to like lay everything out.
Well, I want to know how you did that yourself. Like, what was it that you had to confront? Why were you going to sleep at 10 a.m.? Like, what were you processing, and what did you find?
For me, I think a bunch of it was, and I mean, okay, the important thing I got to say is that it's never done, right? And so you always want to feel that, oh, it's like a movie where you have this big fight and then it's successful and then your hero's welcome and you're done. There is some of that, but like, it's really an infinite ongoing renegotiation with yourself. But the thing that I went through, why was I sleeping. Part of it was my relationship with creativity and my not just creativity in the like writing sense, but like just the way my life had turned out and being kind of, how would I frame this? Okay, when I was a teenager, I think I was a very passionate kid. I was very I was like a rock star, wannabe, emo musician, screaming, heart on sleeve kind of guy. And I felt a need to be serious in my 20s. And I think there was some frivolousness that I was kind of like locking away. Like this childish, cheerful, silly. There's a bunch of that energy that I kind of trapped and put away. And there was stuff about school, I think. There was stuff about childhood stuff. I think I never... So writing my book, I realized I never properly acknowledged like the neglect in my earlier childhood. So I wouldn't say I was like abused. Like I didn't like have a horrible time or whatever, but like there were a bunch of things about my early life that I had spoken about before, but I never really sat down to really feel it. Like, and you know, I think especially for men, right? Like, it feels like saying things like I had a sad childhood, it makes you look weak, right? And weakness is something that, you know, I ideally so a bunch of stuff about I think weakness and strength and loneliness and alienation, you know. So growing up as a minority for one thing, right? Like I think I had internalized that being tough and being and even then I don't think I was ever like very binary about it. So I think I always knew that, oh, you know, being charismatic, like, so even playing in a band and stuff, right? So you are talking about your feelings, right? So you're like singing emo songs or whatever, but it's very much from this position of strength. So even if you're singing, oh my god, like I'm heartbreak and everything, like whatever, it's from a position of strength. And I had like some despair and anger and a bunch of those kind of very, you know, how do you describe it? It's just feelings that are not, you know, not morning talk show kind of feelings, right? They're not very
late night podcast feelings.
Yeah, sure. Like it's the stuff that you can't, you know, like just despair and all of those things. And I had at some point felt obliged to lock away a lot of those things because I felt like if I share that, what's the point? You know, people are just going to think worse of me. Or, I mean, I don't know if I believe that people will think worse of me. It's just that I felt that I needed to, I wouldn't say hide, but I needed to strip away a bunch of that to... Okay, maybe a simpler way of putting it is this. You know, so my first book was called Friendly Ambitious Nerd, and it's so optimistic and cheerful and whatever. It's all true. None of it's fake. It's all who I really am. But to kind of present that, like, it's automatically, it filters out a bunch of stuff. And so the stuff inside the labyrinth is all the stuff that was not front and center of cheerful, everything's going to be great, you know, like we're going to do wonderful things, blah, blah, blah. Like, there is this whole other dark side of, no, you're not, everything's fucked up, the world's full of shit, like, everything's terrible. Like, there's all of that. And, you know, I know better now that, okay, I don't necessarily have to shout that from the rooftops, right? Like, I use the analogy of, you know, we do compartmentalize for good reason in life, right? Like there's a reason we have a toilet to go to the restroom in, and we have a kitchen that we eat dinner at, and they are not the same place for good reason. And so similarly, it's like, you know, like darker, less socially acceptable feelings or whatever, they are to be shared in contexts that are designed for that, and it's all that. But like, learning to express yourself in those ways takes practice and skill, and the world is not good at teaching people how to do that, right? Like whether it's this general state of parenting or broader culture or whatever, like civilization relies on people just kind of I mean, the incentives that civilization uses are very stick and carrot kind of, very, very blunt, very, it's not very thoughtful. And so a lot of people have a lot of like technical debt with regards to the emotions and feeling or whatever. And you have to process it somewhere, somehow, right? And so even phrases like, take the phrase, boys don't cry. Right? I don't think it is, so it's like a game of broken telephone where by the time you have that phrase, it's like, it's become so caricatured of the truth. I do think that there's a truth about, and like how I would discuss this with my nephew, for example, who's like 12 or 13. It's that, okay, so, men and women have broadly different, like the world expects things differently from us. They perceive us differently. And, it shouldn't, ideally, I would love a world where like expressing weakness and despair and all those things is like completely fine and everyone's cool with it. But in practice, it's not really the truth. And so, you're going to have to learn it would be wise, or it would lead to better outcomes for you if you can, kind of regulate yourself and kind of like choose when to express your feelings in some contexts and some contexts not. And there's just, just go on and on about all the details. And it's like, if you smush all of that into like a 2-second soundbite, it might be like, oh, boys don't cry, right? But that's not it's not that. But when you get it smushed that much, and it's, I do think that in the broader gender discourse or whatever, like, I have noticed some interesting things that I want to explore and write about or speak about, which is that, like, again, women don't. There are certain things about the ways that men are perceived that women don't necessarily get. And they understand it when you frame it in the inverse. Like, why does representation matter, right? Like, why is it useful for people to see successful examples of people who look like them? And it's not necessarily even for the person themselves, but for other people. Like, there's this photo of this Mexican American astronaut. It's a picture. You see the picture of it. It's an astronaut who's Latino guy, a Latino astronaut, and it's just such a great photo, and you just know that, it's not necessary. So one is that a young Latino boys can be like, oh, I could be an astronaut too, right? That's great. And the other thing is that for some people, they had just never even considered that, because you've never seen a non-white astronaut before, right? And when they see that image, that is helpful to the kids who are going to try to do a thing that no one else has seen done before. It's about like perception. Where am I going with that? It's just the point of all of that was boys don't cry, shunning. Life is hard, I guess. It's just really just there's all kinds of complexity and how people perceive things, and it's different people interpret the idea of expressing weakness differently. Okay, I think it's intuitive when you talk about parenting, right? So like, how much should a parent convey their emotional state to their kids, right? And people intuitively get that, oh, if you're stressed about paying the bills, you shouldn't unload that stress on your child, right? Like, you shouldn't come home from work and be like, oh my God, I don't know how we're going to pay the bills. I don't know if we're going to have a roof next month. And the kid's like, I'm 5. I don't know any. But that doesn't mean that when you're stressed, you don't tell your kids anything at all. Because chances are, if you're stressed and you don't tell your kids anything at all, it's unlikely that you're perfectly able to hold everything in and then pretend nothing's okay. Like, kids will know. Like, people always say like, oh, when I was 5, my dad was stressed and he tried to hide it, but I knew, right? Kids are very perceptive. So the middle ground move that's smart is, one, yes, you're stressed. Go and have a beer with your friend and like whine and complain about, oh my God, I don't know what the fuck's going to happen, right? Like, which is normal. You need to express that distress. And then you sit in your car and you take a breath and like, okay, I got to explain this to my kid. And then you try and process a way to present to the kid, like, hey, kiddo, daddy's got challenges at work, right? And I'm not so sure how these things are going to be. So it's going to be a bit tough, but everything's going to be okay. Like, you give them the truth. It's slightly sanitized, and so that they are not in the dark. So like, oh, no, if I'm gonna be stressed, please don't. It's not about you. It's about work. Like don't feel bad. And if I do say anything bad, like I'm sorry. Talk to me about it. Let's whatever. And so that is a nice example, I think, of sharing what's on your mind, but not bleh, like just
what's also weird about it. What's also weird
Mm-hmm.
about this is that it changes. The advice that you're giving changes based on the age of the child.
That's
so
true.
like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like a 10-year-old might have a different understanding than a 16-year-old. And
That's true. Yeah.
It's an interesting, observation from all that. But
That is true.
Unfortunately, we have to bring this podcast to a close and land it. I feel like I could talk to you forever, though, and so we'll have to do a part 2. But
Sure.
I'm curious if you have a challenge you could leave people with, is often how I end these podcasts, and I'm curious if anything comes to mind.
So my default challenge that I challenge everyone is to do 100 of something. But that's kind of left field from the context of this conversation. But the point of doing 100 of something is just when you're prolific, you will learn stuff about yourself, and you will learn stuff that you don't know, and it's a journey. And when you finish it, it's gonna be interesting. But let's not. I just want to say that because that's my default challenge. But trying to think of something thematically relevant to this conversation. So I guess. So I have 2 books. One's Friendly Ambitious, and the other one's Introspect. And so I've just been talking about the Labyrinth and the Minotaur. So I guess I'll go with that. Like, take yourself out on like a coffee date. Like go somewhere different. Go to look at your city map or whatever, and like go to a bar. Not a bar. A bar's too noisy. Go to a coffee shop somewhere that you've never been, and bring a notebook or use your notes app on your phone. Turn on like airplane mode so you don't check Twitter, and spend an hour just freestyling your life story, right? Like your memoirs from childhood or whatever. Like you don't necessarily need to write like, everything about your early childhood, but just tell the story of who you are. So say, I am so and so, I'm X years old. When I was a kid, I liked to do X, and my favorite thing was Y. A funny story that I like to tell people is Z. Like just write for like an hour-ish. Just write the story of your life, however you feel, whatever you feel needs to be said, or whatever you think is interesting about yourself. And once you do that, read it later on, like the next day or whatever. Read it out loud, and maybe even record a video of yourself reading out loud, or you could just go straight to video and just record a video of yourself talking about it. So the point is to articulate a narrative of your life that you can revisit, and once you can revisit it, you can quote unquote troubleshoot it and look for give yourself some time to look at it and then be like, what's surprising here, or what did I leave out, or what did you could revisit it like a year later even, right, or a week later, like whatever. And I would bet that you would find something interesting about yourself. And once you have that experience, consider that you are more interesting than you know. This is like, you think you know yourself and you know some version of yourself, but you don't actually know yourself nearly as well as you think. Even no matter how. So I've been writing like 1 million words of memoirs in my life by now, and I still surprise myself with things that I don't know about myself, or I thought I knew something about myself and I don't. And once you have that experience of surprising yourself about yourself, that consider how mysterious and delightful you are, and like that is the beginning. That can be a beginning of like a more mystical, exciting relationship with yourself and with life, and that's the challenge.
Visa, thank you so much for taking the time today. I'll link your Twitter below. I really appreciate you tremendously. You're a brilliant thinker, and you're somebody who has impacted me in a tremendously positive way, not only in this conversation, but on Twitter as well, in your writing. So keep going, keep doing you. I know you're in a rut right now, or in a down phase, but it's all good. It'll get solved, and I appreciate you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Danny. I'll see you soon.